Well, it was said that something needed to be done to light a fire under UFC 202. It was said that there was no way Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz could recreate the magic they created prior to their first fight back in March. Well, they may have just done that and then some. Wow, how about that? We're going to talk about it here on this reaction video. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, of course, back in Las Vegas alongside my partners in crime, Marc Raimondi, Shaun Al-Shatti. The UFC 202 press conference just wrapped up, and what a scene it was. They started without Conor McGregor. Officially, they started around 11 or so minutes after 1 p.m. local time. Conor was nowhere to be found. UFC President Dana White said that we're not waiting around for him anymore, that he needed to respect people's time. At around 1:30 local time, Conor McGregor showed up. Moments later, Nate Diaz decided to walk off the stage. Conor didn't seem to like that. There were some F-bombs exchanged, some words exchanged back and forth between the two teams, and then the bottles started to fly. Cans were thrown, bottles were thrown, and then shortly thereafter, UFC President Dana White wrapped up the press conference. What a scene it was. Marc, you were there. We were all there. What did you make of it? Was that a home run? Was that what the UFC needed to, again, light a fire under this card?
You know, we're standing in front of the roller coaster at New York right now, and I can't help but feel that this whole saga with McGregor and Diaz has been a bit of a roller coaster, because everyone was just talking about how it was very subdued coming into this week. McGregor had the media day in Vegas, and he was almost quiet and soft-spoken. Yeah, he lobbed some trash talk here and there at Diaz and others like John Cena, but it wasn't the boisterous, it wasn't the braggadocio of McGregor in the past. It was more of a subdued, calm McGregor, and then this happened today, where what an advertisement for Monster Energy. Conor McGregor picks up a Monster Energy can that was rolling around on the stage and launches it toward Team Diaz inside the David Copperfield Theater. Complete and utter madness. I guess we shouldn't expect anything less from these guys, but it seemed like it had already peaked and plateaued, and now here we are again talking about just a wild scene. People are going to say it's bad for the sport. I don't know about that. I found it pretty entertaining to me. So
I agree. I found it entertaining, compelling. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shaun. You didn't love it. You weren't feeling it. Right?
I wouldn't say that's true. I think when it happened, it was strange because the press conference felt so disappointing for the first 15 minutes. It felt very strange. There was a very tense feeling, and you could sense it even in Dana. Like, he was very angry with just what was going on. And then it went from 0 to 100 really quickly. And I wouldn't say I didn't like it. It felt a little premeditated. It felt like this was going to Nate was going to walk out as soon as Conor got there. But as soon as it kind of escalated from there, and the teams got involved, and everything kind of picked up. It definitely seemed more real than I guess it did at the beginning. And watching it back, I went back and watched back the video, and it is quite funny. And to Marc's point, I mean, people who say this would be bad for the game, I mean, this has been going on in the fight game forever. I mean, you got Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis. That's, like you said earlier, that's one of the most famous pressers ever. So I wouldn't say I didn't like it. I wouldn't say that.
Well, I want to ask you about the word premeditated, because, of course, there are going to be naysayers who say this was all staged by the UFC. They needed to do something like this. They pulled it off just to boost pay-per-view sales. But when you say premeditated, you don't think that they decided, earlier this morning that they were going to script this whole thing, right?
No. I just think that Nate knew that he was going to walk out at some point in Conor and kind of make a scene about it. And I have nothing to back that up. That's just kind of the sense that I picked up.
Perhaps reactionary is I mean, it doesn't really feel like he was planning to do this from the get-go. More saying, hey, Conor's not here. He is here now. Now I'm jetting because I got here on time, essentially.
Yeah, more or less. And I think it's good because, like we said, this fight needed something to boost it back up. And I feel like now this is a good table setter for what we're going to start going through for the rest of the week. We have more interesting things, different things to talk about. And I mean, me and Marc were talking earlier, and it's like you almost need them to be like security teams for these early weigh-ins and all these things where there's going to be tight hallways and all of these crews, like, because both Conor and Nate's crew are just going to be hanging around each other. Because I mean, the 209 crew just doesn't mess around, man. Like it may be fun to us, but they consider this real. So I feel like it's going to be interesting to watch as this week progresses, how this works out.
And again, to squash any of the conspiracy theorists out there, it felt very real and tense to me as well, especially when those bottles were being thrown back and forth. When they started the press conference without Conor McGregor, who was obviously a very big part of this show, I was wondering if that was the right call. I mean, it takes two to tango, essentially. But I kind of feel like doing that in its own right, from the get-go, they actually pulled this one off perfectly. Not having him there is a story within himself. Him, in limbo, whether or not he's going to show up, is a story within itself. Every single aspect of this circus, if you will, that just wrapped up at the press conference, I thought was a home run. I thought it couldn't have gone better for the UFC. Obviously, we don't want anyone to get hurt, but now that we know no one got hurt, this is a great thing, right? For the pay-per-view. At the end of the day, why are they doing it? To sell pay-per-views. This got people talking, correct?
There's no doubt about it, and I've always said, and this is something that Dave Meltzer said for a very long time, Fight Week is really where you get a good portion, a good percentage of pay-per-view buys, and something like this can really attract the casual fan who may be watching ESPN and see what is going on in Las Vegas. What is this craziness? What is this wild skirmish? That kind of stuff really does help. I know, again, to say people are going to say it's bad for the sport, but this is the fight game. This is something this is like eons old, this kind of thing. There wasn't any Monster Energy bottles thrown, as far as I know, in the past, but similar things have happened. And to your point about it being a work, being premeditated, people are saying that it may be staged. Are you telling me that both of these guys got together with Dana White and said, "Oh, yeah, we're going to do this"? That's ridiculous.
We shouldn't even spend time on that because it really wasn't.
It's ridiculous. I mean, these guys really can't stand each other. You think Nick Diaz is talking with Nate? Oh yeah, we're gonna say Nick Diaz has never staged anything in his entire life. He is 100% real all the time. So that's ridiculous to say. But again, like you said, when you put these guys together, there's something about it. Even that weird press conference where the audio wasn't working, there's just that chemistry there. Whether it's in a fight or a press conference or on a media call, there's just something between these two guys, and it's a rivalry that I think we're going to be talking about years and years down the line. Doesn't mean anything for titles, rankings, but it's just a special rivalry, I think, that we have now.
I also tend to believe that this, I don't want to call it a feud, but the tension between Dana White and Conor McGregor is a nice selling point as well. Again, people like when the boss and the employees, so to speak, and I know that term is a hot button term, but you get my point, are sort of feuding and they can sit back and watch it. Dana White was very unhappy with Conor McGregor. It was very clear that he was pissed off. Do you think that him starting the press conference without Conor was the right call ultimately for this relationship?
For the right call for the relationship? I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure on that, but it was interesting to hear Dana say, he needs to start respecting people's time, and it kind of just put his foot down on that, because this has been a pattern that we've seen forever. Is Conor is always going to be late to these press conferences, and it's I don't know. It's so strange, the mythos of Conor in these press conferences now, because you never know what you're going to get. You could get something like the Go Big press conference where he's just going wild and ripping on everybody. You could get something where he just doesn't even come to the press conference, and then something where he comes late, and something like this happens. You just never know what you're going to get with a Conor press conference.
What's the bottom line, though? The common denominator is it's must-see TV.
Yeah.
You have to watch it because you have no idea, as you just laid out, what's going to happen. That's beautiful theater.
Absolutely, and like we were saying, it makes good B-roll. For people who aren't here, for people who aren't in the bubble, in the niche, watching all this, consuming all this, when they just see this on ESPN and they see, oh, these two guys are fighting again, and then they see all this craziness with the bottles and everything, that's good B-roll, and that, like you said, that sells pay-per-views.
Sure, and if you think that the UFC is upset about this, of course, Dana White wrapped up the press conference. I think he got the cue. It was time to wrap it up. Wrap it up on a high note. But if you think they're upset, just go look at their Twitter. Look how they're promoting it. They were all over it. Now, again, that doesn't suggest that it was premeditated. It just suggests that they know that they got something here. Now let's get it out to the masses. Do you begrudge Nate Diaz for walking out when he did? Or do you see his point? I showed up. Now you're here talking smack. I'm out of here.
I don't begrudge that at all, because if McGregor is going to come late, Nate wasn't 100% on time either. He was maybe 10 minutes late. But if someone's going to be late, why not? And honestly, I think the whole thing, there was some kind of a, not premeditated, but I feel like there was some kind of a plan to mess with McGregor in some way. I'm not saying that anything was staged, but I think that Nate wanted to do something like that. I don't know if walking out was part of the thing, but it seemed like him and his whole crew, his whole team got up at the same time, flipped a bunch of birds, and just walked out. And that whole scene at the end happened, which I don't think that was premeditated at all. But certainly there was something in the works about Nate leaving early, especially I think once Conor came late. Nate actually got up during the press conference at one point and talked to somebody, and then came back. I'm not sure what that was all about. One other thing about McGregor and Dana, if you go back and you watch the video, there's a very interesting scene where Dave Schaller is trying to hold McGregor back, and Dana White is like yelling at him from like across the stage. and McGregor just goes like he just like gives like a little almost like an adamant, like a vehement like shrug. It was a very interesting scene, and I don't know 100% what that means.
Yeah, what are you suggesting?
Was that something like, well, this is what you want? So that's
Right.
I don't
Okay.
know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but obviously the UFC wants McGregor to do more promotion than he's doing. He's kind of curtailed that this fight, and part of me thinks that maybe that's what he was saying. Like, you want to sell pay-per-views? Well, guess what? Look what we just did.
Yeah, and there was a report actually that came out this morning from Darren Ravel of ESPN saying that they have yet to sell around 14% of the T-Mobile Arena, that there are around 2,700 tickets still available, which is somewhat surprising. Although, how about this? I mean, let's talk about the scene inside that press conference. You said that it was a strange scene. When you compare it to UFC 200, and we spoke on Monday about the amount of Irish fans that we saw here. A lot of Irish fans made the trip because they thought Conor McGregor was going to fight on this card. It doesn't feel like a lot of them are here. This press conference was in a much smaller theater, and it just didn't have the same kind of vibe that we're used to when Conor has a press conference. Would you agree?
100%. And I was even talking to a few Irish journalists while we were here, and they were completely on board with what we're saying. They just don't believe that many Irish are going to come. I mean, the European Championships, a lot of Irish travel to that. Olympics, all of these things, rapid fire. Plus, Conor's right. He fights a lot, man. You can't, and it takes thousands of dollars for them to come over to Las Vegas. I think what we saw with 189 and then 194, I honestly don't know if we'll ever see a scene like that again, just because you can't replicate that kind of magic. And once you do it more and more and more, it's just old hat. And so, especially for this, where there's stakes, but there's not a title on the line, and it has been a very weird lead up to this. I just feel like, like we said, where it's placed in the sporting calendar, we're just not going to get that kind of vibe that we're used to getting.
Yeah, and wasn't it funny? I mean, a big part of this whole feud has been Conor not showing up to the press conference and the marketing prior to UFC 200, and then pulling him from the card, and us sort of debating whether or not that was the right call. And now we have this emergence of the Professional Fighters Association, and they're saying, look, there needs to be a grievance process, and they can't tell the fighters what to do and when to do it. And who was sitting in the front row at the press conference was Jeff Boris of the Professional Fighters Association, wearing a white button-down shirt with a massive PFA logo. And Marc, you asked UFC President Dana White what he thought of the emergence of union talk in the sport, and he said he didn't know much about it. Do you believe him?
I think that was more of a no comment than anything. I think that he didn't really want to talk about that at a press conference that's supposed to sell pay-per-views, which I completely understand his point of view, but I think it needs to be asked because we don't get as much access to Dana White and UFC executives as we used to, even just a few months or even a few years ago. So I thought it was an important question to ask because I feel like not only was Jeff Boris there, front and center, which I think it took guts to do that, to come to that press conference for him. I think it's just an important story for the sport. I think, all the major sports have some kind of fighter organization, some kind of fighter union, association, what have you. And I think that eventually that will happen in the UFC, in MMA, and this could be the forefront of it right now. So I think that it's an important story. It has to be asked.
Are we caught in the moment here, Shaun, or do you think now that you've had some time to digest what just transpired, will this help pay-per-view sales? Will this help ticket sales? What do you think? Is this the kind of thing that UFC 202 needed?
I think unquestionably it will help pay-per-view sales. How much is a good question, and I don't think it's going to match. We kept talking about this 11-day span that happened back in March, and I just don't think we're not going to reach that level. But I think this absolutely did help, and like I said, it kind of sets the table for what we're going to talk about for the rest of the week when we see Conor and Nate tomorrow, and we just start going through the paces of fight week. Now there's some new stuff, there's some fresh stuff to talk about, and there's also that tension has started back up.
And Marc, do you think that either the UFC or the Nevada Athletic Commission should impose some kind of fine, some kind of punishment on either Nate Diaz or Conor McGregor because of what happened?
I don't know. I'm almost sure they won't. The one thing that I'll say about that, and I know that ultimately the UFC is not upset by this, they're probably thrilled by this, but when Conor McGregor picked up that Monster Energy drink can from the stage and he chucked it at Team Diaz, that got me worried because a water bottle is one thing, that's probably not going to do a whole lot of damage, but a full Monster Energy can, that I think it was Glover Teixeira's,
Yes.
poor guy. No energy for Glover today. That's scary. That's scary when something like a projectile like that is thrown across the room. Didn't hit anyone. Everything's going to be fine. No one was injured. I don't think there will be any kind of punishment.
Worth noting that pitch was high and outside. It really didn't hit the mark. It reminded me of a scene that has played out on many playgrounds among kids where you're just looking for anything to throw at your friends behind a fort. What else can I get my hands on? He got the Monster Energy, but the good news, at least as we know it right now, no one got hurt. The only thing that was really affected perhaps were the pay-per-view sales. Perhaps that's the home run. That's the fire that the UFC was looking for, but couldn't agree more. This is now a new wrinkle to this feud and one that will set the tone for the rest of the week here in Las Vegas. Of course, we have just begun our coverage of UFC 202. Do not go anywhere. Who knows what's going to happen each and every time these two are in the same room. Tomorrow, there's a media day. There's a workout. There's all kinds of things going on. So keep it locked right here on MMAfighting.com because something tells me it's going to get a whole lot more interesting. For now, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. For Marc, for Shaun, I'm Ariel. Appreciate your time.